The day I discovered my husband had drained our $872,000 joint savings account to set up his 26-year-old girlfriend in a waterfront condo was the same day I decided his precious vintage Porsche collection, 6 rare cars he'd spent 2 decades obsessively acquiring, would finance my hostile takeover of his architectural firm. James Mitchell thought he was untouchable in Dubai with his Russian mistress and my retirement money, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail about the quiet museum curator he'd married. I specialized in evaluating the true worth of precious things, and I was about to show him exactly how much his betrayal would cost. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first hint that something was wrong came on an ordinary Tuesday in April. I was meeting with our financial advisor to discuss retirement planning, something I'd been pushing James to do for months. As the wife of a successful architect and CEO, I'd left most of our financial decisions to him, focusing instead on my career as a museum curator and our teenage daughter Paige's college applications. I'm concerned about the recent withdrawal activity, Martin, our advisor of 12 years, said with a frown, turning his monitor so I could see the screen. What withdrawal activity? I asked, leaning forward to see the numbers that made my stomach drop. Our joint savings account, the one we'd been building for retirement and Paige's college fund, had dwindled from just over $900,000 to $32,184 in the span of 3 months. These transfers, Martin pointed to a series of withdrawals, each just under $50,000. 6 withdrawals in February, 8 in March, 3 so far in April. I assumed this was for the vacation home in Sedona you mentioned last year. My mouth went dry. We decided against the Sedona property. Martin's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Oh, I thought perhaps... He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Has James discussed any other major investments with you recently? No, I said, my voice barely audible as I stared at the screen. Nearly $900,000 gone, our retirement, Paige's college fund. The security we'd spent 20 years building. I'm sure there's an explanation, Martin offered awkwardly. Would you like me to set up a joint meeting with you and James to discuss this? I nodded mechanically, but a cold certainty was already forming in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a surprise investment. Something was very wrong. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets of our Boston suburb. The 3-story Victorian we'd painstakingly restored over the past 15 years came into view. The wraparound porch where we'd hosted summer parties, the turret bedroom where Paige had spent her childhood reading Harry Potter by flashlight. James was in Dubai, overseeing a major project for Mitchell plus Warner Architects, the firm he'd co-founded with his college roommate, Trevor Warner. He wouldn't be back for another week. That gave me time to figure out what was happening before confronting him. Inside, I went straight to James's home office. In 21 years of marriage, I'd never snooped through his things. We'd built our relationship on trust, or so I'd thought. Now, with shaking hands, I entered the password to his computer. Page 702, our daughter's birthday. It didn't work. I tried variations. Our anniversary, his mother's birthday. Nothing. The password had been changed. Next, I tried the filing cabinet where he kept important documents. Locked. The key that normally stayed in his desk drawer was missing. My heart pounding, I called Claire, James's executive assistant at the firm. Claire, it's Vanessa. I need a favor. Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. Is everything okay? You sound upset. I forced my voice to remain steady. I'm fine. I just need to check some financial documents for our tax filing. But James changed his computer password. Do you happen to know it? Pause. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell explicitly told me not to share his new passwords with anyone, even family. Something about a surprise he's planning. Another pause. He did mention you might call about this. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. He'd anticipated this, prepared for it. I understand, I managed. When did he change the password? About 3 months ago, right before the Dubai project started. 3 months. The same time frame as the withdrawals. Claire, is James in Dubai? Now? Can you transfer me to him? Another uncomfortable pause. He's in meetings all day with the Al-Nazari group. Would you like me to have him call you when he's available? Yes, please. It's urgent. After hanging up, I sank into James's leather desk chair, trying to process what was happening. $900,000 didn't just disappear. There had to be records, transactions, something to explain where it had gone. I remembered James's credit card statements. They were sent to his email, but I could access them online with the account number. I dug through the desk until I found an old statement, then logged into the account. What I saw made my blood run cold. Charges for the Four Seasons Hotel, not in Dubai, but in Boston, our own city. A receipt from Tiffany & Co. for $42,000. Multiple charges at restaurants I'd never heard of. A recurring payment to a property management company for a waterfront address in the Seaport District. And most damning of all, a receipt for 2 first-class tickets to Bali, departing next month. Not in my name, but for James Mitchell and Katerina Sorokin. My hands trembled as I searched for the name online. Her Instagram appeared immediately. A stunning blonde barely older than my daughter, her profile filled with luxury vacations, designer clothes, and subtle hints at a relationship with an older, wealthy man whose face never quite appeared in frame. 3 weeks ago, she'd posted a photo of a woman's hand wearing a massive diamond ring, captioned only with, "He finally left his wife. Engaged." New chapter. The room spun around me. 21 years of marriage, a daughter, a life built together. And James had not only been having an affair, but had drained our savings to fund it, was planning to leave me, and had already proposed to this woman using our money. I printed everything: the credit card statements, the bank withdrawals, Katerina's social media posts. Then, as the final piece clicked into place, I checked our retirement accounts. As I suspected, they too had been emptied. Not completely, that would have required my signature, but James had taken every penny he could access independently. Phone rang, startling me. James's face appeared on the screen. "Nessa," he said, using the nickname I'd once found endearing. His voice was casual, as if everything was normal. "Claire said you needed to talk urgently. Is everything okay with Paige?" "Where are you, James?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Dubai, of course. At the hotel. It's nearly midnight here." I could hear a woman's voice in the background, speaking softly in what sounded like Russian. "Is Katerina enjoying Dubai?" I asked. Silence. Then, "Vanessa, I can explain." "Can you explain $872,000? Can you explain emptying our retirement accounts? Can you explain the condo in the Seaport, or the engagement ring, or the first-class tickets? To Bali?" More silence. "I was going to tell you when I got back," he finally said, his voice dropping the pretense of normalcy. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out." "Find out what? That you're leaving me, or that you've stolen our life savings to do it?" "It's not stealing," he said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "Half of that money is mine." "And half is mine," I countered. "And all of it was in accounts we built together, for our future, for our daughter's education. Paige will be fine. The firm is doing well. I'll make sure she's taken care of." "How generous," I said, anger finally breaking through the shock. "And what about me, James? After 21 years, what do I get?" He sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. "You'll get the house, of course, and I'm prepared to offer a fair settlement. My lawyer will be in touch when I return next week." Your lawyer? I repeated. You already have a lawyer. Vanessa, be reasonable. We've been drifting apart for years. You're so wrapped up in your museum work, we barely see each other. Katerina and I— Don't. I cut him off. Don't you dare try to justify this. There was murmuring in the background, and James's voice became muffled as he covered the phone to speak to Katerina. When he returned, his tone was clipped. We'll discuss this when I get back. I have a meeting early tomorrow. Try not to be dramatic about this, Nessa. These things happen. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The call ended, and I sat in stunned silence, staring at the phone in my hand. These things happen, as if emptying our accounts and abandoning our marriage was as ordinary as a flight delay or a power outage. I looked around the office, at the architectural awards on the walls, the family photos on the credenza, the model of the modern home James had designed for us but never built because I preferred our Victorian. All of it suddenly felt like props. In a play, a life that had never been real. My gaze fell on the small display cabinet in the corner, where miniature replicas of James's prized vintage Porsche collection sat on illuminated shelves. The real vehicles, 6 rare Porsches worth over $3 million collectively, were stored in a climate-controlled garage across town. James's most treasured possessions, which he pampered and protected more carefully than he had our marriage. A thought began to form, not fully developed yet, more an ember of an idea than a flame. But as I gathered the financial documents and headed upstairs to call my oldest friend, Diane, who happened to be one of Boston's top divorce attorneys, I felt something unexpected beneath the pain and shock. Resolve. James Mitchell thought he had it all figured out. He thought he could discard 2 decades of marriage, steal our savings, and walk away to a new life with his young girlfriend, leaving me with nothing but a house and a fair settlement. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. He did. What? Diane Matthews nearly spilled her glass of Cabernet across her immaculate white sofa. We'd been friends since college, long before she became one of Boston's most feared divorce attorneys. Her corner office overlooking the harbor was adorned with photos of her standing beside smiling women and a few men who'd walked away from their marriages with everything they deserved, emptied our accounts. Nearly $900,000, I repeated, still struggling to believe it myself. And that's just what I've found so far. Diane set her wine glass down deliberately, her professional demeanor taking over. Start from the beginning. Tell me exactly what you've discovered and how. I laid out the evidence, the bank statements, credit card charges, and Katerina Sorokin's Instagram posts, including the engagement ring photo. With each new detail, Diane's expression darkened. The bastard planned this meticulously, she muttered, examining the bank withdrawal records. Just under $50,000 each time to avoid triggering bank reporting requirements. He's been liquidating your future for months. But how? I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. I should have been notified about withdrawals that large. Diane's expression shifted to one I recognized from courtroom footage I'd once watched. The look she got when she'd caught someone in a lie. Your notifications were probably going to an email account he controls, she said. Or he changed the contact information on the accounts. Classic financial infidelity playbook. The term hit me like a slap. Financial infidelity. The betrayal suddenly had a name. Is any of it recoverable? I asked, clinging to a thin thread of hope. Diane didn't sugarcoat it. Some, possibly. The retirement accounts he raided illegally might be recoverable through legal action. But the joint savings? That's murkier territory. In Massachusetts, he had legal access, even if his use of the funds was morally reprehensible. So he gets away with stealing my half of our life savings? Not if I can help it, Diane said, her voice steely. We need to act quickly before he can hide more assets. First step, financial restraining order to freeze everything else. Second, comprehensive forensic accounting to track every penny. Third, we document his affair and abandonment. My head was spinning. What about Paige? She's at NYU. Her tuition payment is due next month, and now there's nothing left in the account we set up for her. We'll file for emergency spousal and child support, Diane assured me. The judge will take her education into account. James won't be allowed to leave his daughter financially stranded. I nodded, trying to take it all in. Just 2 days ago, my biggest concern had been the water damage in the museum's Renaissance wing. Now I was strategizing how to financially survive my husband's betrayal. There's something else, I said, hesitating. James's partner, Trevor Warner, approached him last month about buying out his share of the firm. James turned him down flat, saying the firm was his legacy. But now, Diane raised an eyebrow. Now he's planning to start fresh with his new girlfriend using your money. The firm would be an inconvenient tie to his old life. Exactly. What if he's planning to sell to Trevor after all? That would be millions more he could take. Not if we move fast enough, Diane said, already typing notes into her tablet. We need to get that financial restraining order today. As we worked through the initial legal strategy, a part of me still couldn't accept this was happening. Despite the evidence before me, I kept expecting to wake up from this nightmare or to discover some rational explanation that would make sense of James's actions. I've been married to him for 21 years, I said quietly. How could I have missed the signs? Diane paused her typing, her expression softening. Vanessa, I've handled over 300 divorces, the most devastated. Clients are always the ones who had no idea it was coming. Master manipulators like James are experts at compartmentalizing their lives. But an affair is one thing. Stealing our entire savings is another level entirely. In my experience, they often go hand in hand. The affair creates the justification for the financial betrayal. He's been telling himself he deserves this money, this new life, this young woman. I thought about James's dismissive tone on the phone. Try not to be dramatic about this, Nessa. These things happen, as if he'd simply dented the car, not destroyed our entire life together. What do I tell Paige? I asked, the thought of our daughter suddenly overwhelming. She adored her father and had followed in his creative footsteps by studying design at NYU. The truth, but carefully, Diane advised. She's 19, not 9. She'll find out eventually anyway, especially once legal proceedings begin. I nodded, dreading that conversation more than anything. One more thing, Diane said, her tone turning even more serious. We need to secure any assets he hasn't gotten yet. Do you have jewelry, art, anything valuable in the house he might try to take? My grandmother's jewelry is in our safe deposit box, I said, suddenly alarmed. He has access. Diane immediately picked up her phone. Sandra, I need an emergency. Appointment at Boston Trust Bank for Vanessa Mitchell. Yes, today. It's regarding a safe deposit box that needs to be secured immediately. After arranging for me to visit the bank within the hour, Diane turned back to me. What else of value do you jointly own that he hasn't liquidated yet? The house is the biggest asset, I said. It's worth about $2.3 million now, fully restored. We own it jointly. Good. That's protected by the restraining order we're filing. What else? I thought for a moment. His car collection. 6 vintage Porsches worth at least $3 million altogether. They're his prized possessions. For the first time since I'd arrived, Diane smiled. Not her sympathetic friend smile, but her shark-like, attorney smile that had made her famous in divorce courts across Massachusetts. Are any of the cars in your name? Or jointly owned? 2 are in both our names, I said, remembering the paperwork. The 1964 356C Cabriolet and the 1973 911 Carrera RS. He put them in both our names for insurance purposes. Those are yours then, Diane said firmly. The restraining order will prevent him from selling or moving any marital assets, including the cars in his name alone, but the two in joint ownership. You have equal claim to those immediately. A plan was starting to form, but I wasn't ready to share it yet, even with Diane. First, I needed confirmation about one more thing. How do I find out if he's been talking to Trevor about selling his share of the firm? Diane considered this. Legally, we'll get that information during discovery. But if you want to know sooner... She didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what she was suggesting. After leaving Diane's office with a list of immediate actions to take, I drove to the bank and secured my grandmother's jewelry collection, pieces dating back 3 generations that James had always dismissed as outdated, but that I knew were worth well over $400,000. The bank manager seemed unsurprised by my request to remove James from the safe deposit box access. Apparently, this happened more often than I'd realized. Next, I drove to Mitchell plus Warner Architects, the sleek glass building in Cambridge that housed the firm James had built with Trevor over the past 15 years. I'd contributed to its early success, hosting client dinners in our home, editing proposals late into the night, even helping design their office space when I'd worked as an exhibit designer before moving to the museum. Instead of going inside, I parked across the street and called Claire, James's assistant. "Mrs. Mitchell," she answered nervously. "Mr. Mitchell asked me to tell you he'll address your concerns when he returns next week." "I'm not calling about James," I said calmly. "I need to speak with Trevor. It's urgent and personal." Claire hesitated. "Mr. Warner is in meetings all afternoon." "Claire," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "I know you're in an uncomfortable position, but this is about Paige's college tuition, which is now in jeopardy. Would you rather I come in and wait in the lobby until Trevor is available? Because I will." 5 minutes later, Trevor Warner walked out of the building, looking around until he spotted my car. Tall and lanky where James was compact and athletic, Trevor had always been the more thoughtful partner, the one who remembered employees' birthdays and asked about their families. He slid into my passenger seat, his expression grave. "Vanessa," Claire said it was urgent. "James emptied our accounts," I said without preamble. "All of them, nearly $900,000, for his girlfriend." Trevor closed his eyes briefly, a pained expression crossing his face. I was afraid of this. "You knew?" I felt a fresh stab of betrayal. "Not specifically about the accounts," Trevor clarified quickly. "But I knew something was off. He's been distracted, secretive, taking calls privately. Last month, he started asking detailed questions about how to value his share of the firm. After he turned down your offer to buy him out," I stated. Trevor's eyes widened slightly. "He told you about that?" "He mentioned it. Said the firm was his legacy, too important to sell." Trevor let out a humorless laugh. "That's not quite how the conversation went. I offered because I was concerned about some decisions he was making, taking on clients with questionable ethics because they paid higher fees, rushing projects to completion at the expense of quality, using firm resources for what he claimed were personal projects." Each new revelation was another blow, another crack in the image of the man I thought I'd married. "Is he planning to sell his share now?" I asked, getting to the heart of why I'd called Trevor here. Trevor nodded slowly. "He called from Dubai yesterday, said he's had a change of heart and wants to discuss terms when he returns." He paused, studying my face. "I'm guessing that's news to you." "Like so many things recently," I replied bitterly. "How much would his half of the firm be worth?" "We had it formally appraised during our discussions last month. His 50% share was valued at $4.8 million, nearly $5 million, on top of our emptied savings accounts. James was setting himself up with close to $6 million to start his new life with Katerina, money that represented 2 decades of our shared work, sacrifice, and planning." "Trevor, I need to know something else," I said, a thought suddenly occurring to me. The Dubai project? Is it real? Trevor's expression confirmed my suspicion before he even spoke. The Al-Nazari Group project is real, but James isn't there. He sent Melissa Chen to handle the client meetings, said he needed to focus on business development locally, so he wasn't even in Dubai. The entire business trip was a fiction to cover his time with Katerina. The betrayal was so complete, so methodically executed, that it left me breathless. "Thank you for being honest with me," I said finally. Trevor reached over and squeezed my hand briefly. "I'm so sorry, Vanessa. For what it's worth, I think he's making the biggest mistake of his life." As Trevor walked back to the office building, I sat in my car, processing everything I'd learned. The scope of James's deception was staggering. The affair, the stolen money, the fake business trip, and now plans to liquidate his share of the firm. But amid the shock and pain, the ember of an idea that had sparked in James's office was now growing into a flame. I thought about the 2 vintage Porsches that were partially mine, the house that was half mine, and the firm that James had built while I supported his ambitions. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect exit strategy, but he'd made one critical miscalculation. He'd underestimated me. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. I hadn't slept in our bed, couldn't bear to lie in the space we'd shared for so many years, and instead had curled up in Paige's old room, surrounded by the fading remnants of her high school years. By 7 a.m., I was seated at our kitchen island, a legal pad before me, methodically listing everything James had taken or planned to take. Joint savings, $872,000 my retirement account, $217,000, the portion he could access without my signature. His retirement account, $395,000 planned sale of firm share, $4.8 million total, $6,284,000, more than $6 million, half of which was rightfully mine after 21 years of marriage. I'd gone part-time at my museum job when Paige was born, sacrificing my own career advancement to support James while he built the firm. Massachusetts was an equitable distribution state. In a divorce, I was entitled to a fair share of our marital assets, including his business. But James was clearly planning to hide as much as possible before serving me with divorce papers. The money already withdrawn was likely nestled in offshore accounts, difficult if not impossible to recover. My phone chimed with a text from Diane. "Financial restraining order granted. He can't touch any remaining assets. Meeting with a forensic accountant this afternoon. Can you come?" At least we'd stopped the bleeding, but the damage was already extensive. I texted back my confirmation, then opened my laptop to check my email. There it was, a message from Paige sent at 2 a.m. Dad called. Said you two are having problems and might separate. What's going on? Call me when you wake up. My heart sank. Of course, James would try to control the narrative, to paint this as a mutual decision or normal marital troubles. I dialed Paige's number, bracing myself for one of the hardest conversations of my life. "Mom?" Her voice was thick with sleep and worry. "What's happening?" Dad was being super weird, saying stuff about how marriages sometimes run their course and you guys have been growing apart. I took a deep breath. "Paige, I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you is going to be painful, but you deserve the truth." Over the next 20 minutes, I explained the situation as gently but honestly as I could. The affair, the stolen money, the plans James had made to abandon our family. I left out the part about her college fund being depleted. She didn't need that additional stress during finals. "I don't understand," Paige said finally, her voice small. "Dad's not. He wouldn't. This doesn't make sense." "I know, sweetheart. I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. But he just helped me with my design project last month. He was normal. He was Dad." The cognitive dissonance in her voice broke my heart. How do you explain to your child that the father they love and trust has been living a double life? "People can compartmentalize," I said, echoing Diane's words. He loves you, Paige. That hasn't changed. Did you talk to Katerina? She asked suddenly. Maybe this is all a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, I said firmly. I've seen the bank records, the credit card statements, the condo he bought her, the engagement ring. Silence, then a muffled sob. He's engaged to her? Already? My stomach clenched. In my effort to be honest, I'd revealed more than I intended. From what I can tell, yes. I'm so sorry, honey. More silence then. I'm coming home. I'll book a flight for tomorrow after my last final. You don't have to do that. I'm okay. I'm not, Paige said simply. I need to be home. After promising to pick her up at the airport the following evening, I ended the call and sat motionless at the kitchen island, staring at nothing. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, the emotional toll of the past 24 hours finally catching up, but I couldn't afford to collapse now. There was too much at stake, too much to do before James returned from his fictional business trip in 5 days. My next call was to Bradley Hayes, the rare automobile dealer and appraiser who had helped James acquire several of his Porsches over the years. Bradley had always been friendlier to me than necessary, his lingering glances at gallery openings suggesting he found me more interesting than James's car wife status would typically warrant. Vanessa, he answered warmly. What a lovely surprise. How are you? I've been better, Bradley. I need your expertise on a sensitive matter. Are you free for coffee today? 2 hours later, I sat across from Bradley at a quiet cafe in Beacon Hill, far from James's usual haunts. At 55, Bradley was distinguished rather than traditionally handsome, with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of confidence that came from moving in wealthy circles without being ostentatiously rich. Himself. I appreciate your discretion, I said after ordering. Of course, Bradley replied, his British accent more pronounced in person than over the phone. You mentioned it was sensitive. How can I help? I decided on direct honesty. James and I are separating. It's not amicable. I need to understand the current market value of his Porsche collection, particularly the two that are in both our names, the 64 356C Cabriolet and the 73 911 Carrera RS. Bradley's eyebrows rose slightly, but his professional demeanor remained intact. I see. Well, the vintage Porsche market has been exceptionally strong lately. The 356C Cabriolet, in the condition James maintains it, would fetch between $250,000 and $300,000 at auction. And the Carrera? The 73 Carrera RS is the crown jewel of his collection, one of only 1,580 ever made, and in exceptional condition. At current market rates, $1.7 to $1.8 million, possibly more to the right buyer. I nearly choked on my coffee. 1.8 million? For one car? Bradley smiled. James never told you what it was worth, did he? He purchased it 5 years ago for $875,000. These particular models have more than doubled in value since then. And the others in his collection? The ones solely in his name? Bradley listed each one with its approximate value. By the time he finished, I understood that James's car collection was worth nearly $4 million total, substantially more than the $3 million I'd estimated. If one needed to sell these vehicles quickly, say within a week, what kind of pricing would be realistic? I asked, trying to sound casual. Bradley studied me for a long moment. Normally, a rushed sale would mean accepting significantly less than market value. However, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I have several clients who have expressed strong interest in the Carrera RS specifically. One in particular has been quite persistent. How persistent? Enough that I believe he would pay close to full market value, even on short notice. I nodded, absorbing this information. And if one wanted to sell the entire collection? Bradley's eyes gleamed with interest. As a package? That would be more challenging on short notice, but not impossible. I would need to make some calls. Please, do, I said, sliding him my card with my personal cell number written on the back. And Bradley? This conversation never happened. He smiled, pocketing my card. What conversation? My next stop was the climate-controlled garage across town where James kept his precious Porsches. I paid the monthly fee, and James had never bothered to remove my name from the access list. Why would he? In his mind, I had no interest in his toys. The security guard recognized me immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, haven't seen you in ages. Mr. Mitchell's out of town, right? Yes, Mike. I just need to check on something for him. Inside, the 6 Porsches gleamed under perfect lighting, each more beautiful than the last. I wasn't a car enthusiast, but even I could appreciate the sleek lines and perfect detailing of these automotive works of art. James had spent countless weekends tinkering with them, talking about them, attending shows and auctions to find the perfect additions to his collection. I walked to the '73 Carrera RS, guards red with black accents, its distinctive ducktail rear spoiler, an iconic silhouette in the vintage car world. Nearly $2 million, according to Bradley, and registered in both our names. I took pictures of all the cars, including close-ups of their license plates and VINs. Then I photographed the space itself, documenting exactly how everything was positioned. Finally, I located the spare key lockbox James had installed and used my code to retrieve the keys for the 2 cars in our joint names. As I held the keys to nearly $2 million worth of automobiles, I thought about what James had taken from me. Not just the money, but the security, the trust, the future we'd planned together. He'd left me with nothing but a house that would be expensive to maintain on my curator's salary and a daughter whose college education was now at risk. I slipped the keys into my purse and left the garage, smiling politely at Mike on my way out. By the time I arrived at Diane's office for our meeting with the forensic accountant, I'd made my decision. The accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Yuan, had already made alarming discoveries. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband has been systematically moving money for longer than you realized, she explained, spreading documents across Diane's conference table. The large withdrawals began 3 months ago, but smaller transfers started nearly 8 months ago. 8 months? I echoed, stunned. The affair had been going on far longer than I'd imagined. Rebecca nodded. He established a shell company, JM Consulting, last July. Since then, he's been directing client payments from Mitchell plus Warner to this shell company. Not all of them, just enough to fly under the radar. We're still calculating the total, but it's at least $450,000. That's embezzlement, Diane said bluntly. He's been stealing from his own firm. Does Trevor know? I asked, thinking of my conversation with James's business partner. Unlikely, Rebecca replied. The transactions were carefully structured to appear as legitimate consulting fees for international projects, areas where Mr. Warner apparently has less involvement. Diane turned to me, her expression grim but determined. This changes things, Vanessa. This isn't just divorce territory anymore. It's criminal. James has been committing fraud against the firm, which affects Trevor as well. Not to mention, tax fraud, Rebecca added. There's no evidence these funds were reported as income. The scale of James's betrayal kept expanding, like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. This wasn't just about an affair, or even stealing our joint savings. He had orchestrated a comprehensive scheme to extract as much money as possible from every available source, our accounts, the firm, possibly even clients. What do we do with this information? I asked, feeling oddly calm despite the shocking revelations. We have several options, Diane said carefully. Legally, we're obligated to disclose financial crimes discovered during divorce proceedings, but the timing of that disclosure is somewhat flexible. I understood what she wasn't saying. Explicitly. This information gave us leverage, powerful leverage that James wouldn't see coming. How would this affect his ability to sell his share of the firm to Trevor? I asked. It would torpedo it, Diane replied. No legitimate buyer would touch a partnership stake mired in fraud allegations. The firm's value could plummet once this becomes public, which would drastically reduce the value of James's share, I concluded. Precisely. Diane studied me. Vanessa, you seem remarkably composed given what we're uncovering. I thought about the Porsche keys in my purse, about Bradley Hayes standing by to help me sell nearly $4 million worth of automobiles, about Trevor Warner's obvious distaste for the direction James had been taking the firm. I'm done being a victim, I said simply. James has spent months orchestrating his exit strategy. Now I'm creating my own. What are you thinking? Diane asked cautiously. I'm thinking it's time to pay Trevor Warner another visit, I replied. And then I need to make a call to my daughter's godfather. Who is? Diane prompted. Robert Chen, the banking executive who helped James secure funding to start Mitchell plus Warner 15 years ago. The man who still holds their business loan and who happens to owe me a favor. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of something beyond shock and betrayal. It felt like power. Paige's flight arrived at 8:47 p.m. the following day. I spotted her immediately as she emerged from the security area, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her face pale and drawn. At 19, she was still finding her adult self, oscillating between a sophisticated college student and the little girl who'd once asked me to check her closet for monsters. When she saw me, she dropped her carry-on and ran into my arms, breaking, into the sobs she'd been holding back during our phone conversations. I can't believe he did this, she cried against my shoulder, oblivious to the curious glances from passing travelers. I keep thinking there must be some explanation. I held her tightly, feeling her body shake with grief. I know, sweetheart. I know. The drive home was quiet, Paige staring out the window at the familiar neighborhood sliding past. When we pulled into our driveway, she looked up at the Victorian house where she'd grown up, its gabled roof and wraparound porch illuminated by carefully placed landscape lighting that James had installed himself. Does the house feel different? To you? She asked softly. Now that you know? The question caught me off guard with its perceptiveness. Yes, I admitted. Like a movie set I've been living on without realizing it. Inside, Paige wandered from room to room, trailing her fingers along furniture and photo frames, as if reassuring herself that the physical artifacts of our family life still existed, despite the emotional earthquake that had destroyed their foundation. She stopped before the large family portrait above the fireplace, taken 3 years ago during a vacation in Nantucket. James had his arms around both of us, his smile radiant with what I'd always interpreted as contentment. Had he been unhappy even then? Planning his escape already? Or had the dissatisfaction come later? Should we take these down? Paige asked, gesturing to the family photos throughout the living room. Not yet, I said. This is still our home, with our memories. What your father did doesn't erase the good parts of our life together. We settled in the kitchen with mugs of tea, Paige perched on a bar stool while I leaned against the counter. For a while, we just existed in the shared silence of grief, allowing ourselves to feel the weight of what had been lost. Mom? Paige finally spoke, her voice small. What's going to happen to us? To our family? The direct question pierced my heart. What would happen to us? The practical answers were still unfolding: division of assets, legal proceedings, financial reconfiguring. But Paige wasn't asking about those things. She was asking about the emotional architecture of our lives, the invisible framework that had suddenly collapsed. We're going to rebuild, I said, choosing my words carefully. Not the same way we were before, that's not possible. But we'll create something new, something honest. You and I are still family, and that won't change. What about college? My tuition payment is due soon. I hadn't planned to have this conversation tonight, but Paige's direct question deserved an honest answer. Your father took the money from your college fund, I said gently. But I'm working on a solution. I promise you will stay at NYU. Her face crumpled. He took my college money? For her? The raw betrayal in her voice was like a physical blow. This was the cruel reality of what James had done. He hadn't just betrayed his wife. He'd betrayed his daughter, prioritizing his new relationship over her education and future. I have a plan, I assured her, moving to sit beside her. It's complicated and I can't share all the details yet, but I'm not letting him destroy what we've built or compromise your future. Paige studied my face, searching for reassurance. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slightly. Does Dad know I'm home? She asked. I haven't told him, I replied, but he might assume you'd come when he called you. I don't know if I can face him, she admitted. I'm so angry I can barely breathe when I think about it. You don't have to see him or talk to him until you're ready, I assured her. And if that's not for a very long time, that's okay too. Later, after Paige had gone to bed, I sat alone, in the darkened living room, staring at the family portrait she'd questioned earlier. For 21 years, my identity had been partially defined by being James Mitchell's wife. Even while maintaining my own career and interests, I'd organized my life around our partnership, our shared goals, our future together. Now that future was gone, incinerated by James's choices. The pain of that loss was a physical ache, like a bruise that throbbed with every heartbeat. But beneath the pain was something else, something I hadn't anticipated. A fierce determination to protect what remained, particularly Paige's well-being and opportunities. The maternal instinct to shield my child from harm had crystallized into cold resolve. I thought about my plan, the steps I'd already set in motion with Bradley Hayes regarding the Porsches, the conversations I needed to have with Trevor and Robert Chen. There was risk involved, significant risk. If I failed, I could end up in an even worse position. But the alternative, accepting whatever fair settlement James deigned to offer after stealing our life savings, was unthinkable. Not just for financial reasons, but because it would mean allowing him to control the narrative, to define the terms of our family's dissolution. My phone lit up with a text message from Bradley Hayes. Buyer confirmed for Carrera. Eager to proceed. Meeting tomorrow? Also, I have interest in a full collection from a collector in Chicago. I wrote back immediately. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., your office. We'll bring documentation for Carrera and 356C. A moment later, he responded, Perfect. And Vanessa? For what it's worth, James is an idiot. Despite everything, I smiled. Then I pulled up my calendar and added 2 more appointments for tomorrow. Lunch with Trevor Warner and, if that went well, an afternoon meeting with Robert Chen at Boston. Trust Bank. As I headed upstairs to my bedroom, sleeping in Paige's room no longer seemed necessary with her home. I paused at the door to James's office. I'd avoided the space since discovering his betrayal, unwilling to immerse myself in his presence even in his absence. But now I entered deliberately, turning on the light and surveying the room that had been his sanctuary. The desk where he'd plotted his escape from our marriage, the bookshelves are lined with architectural texts and awards, the display cabinet with the miniature replicas of his beloved Porsches. I opened the cabinet and removed the miniature of the red Carrera RS, examining its perfect detailing. James had paid over $800 for this scale model, delighted that it matched his prized possession down to the special order interior trim. Tomorrow, I would set in motion a plan to sell the real thing. Not just for the money, though that was certainly part of it, but as the first step in reclaiming control of a narrative that James thought he'd already written to its conclusion. Replaced the model car carefully, then moved to James's desk. The drawers I'd found locked during my initial panicked search remained locked, but now I had a different approach. Instead of trying to break in, I examined the surface of the antique mahogany desk itself. James had a habit of writing down passwords, unable to remember the increasingly complex combinations required by modern security systems. He wasn't foolish enough to leave them in obvious places, but I knew his patterns after 2 decades together. The desk had a small drawer in the center, above the knee space. It had a false bottom, a feature James had proudly pointed out when he'd purchased the piece at auction. He kept emergency cash there, usually a few $100s. I slid the drawer open, removed the fountain pens and notepads inside, then pressed the hidden latch that released the false bottom. The cash was gone, no surprise, but taped to the body. Underside of the drawer was a small piece of paper. Written in James's precise architect's handwriting was a string of characters. KS26, per 12. A password, and not just any password. Judging by the KS morning brought a flurry of activity. Paige was still asleep. Emotional exhaustion had finally pulled her under around 2 a.m. when I slipped out to meet Diane for a strategy session before my appointments. "You're doing what?" Diane nearly shouted when I laid out my plan over coffee at her favorite bakery. "Selling the 2 Porsches in our joint names," I repeated calmly. "I have every legal right to do so. The financial restraining order prevents either of us from selling jointly owned marital assets without court approval," I finished for her. "But according to the vehicle titles, these 2 cars aren't classified as general marital assets. They're specifically registered to James Mitchell and Vanessa Mitchell, joint tenants with right of survivorship." Diane's eyes narrowed. Which means either one of us can sell without the other's consent. It's a specific form of ownership James chose for insurance purposes. If he died, I'd automatically get the cars without them passing through probate. "That smug bastard never imagined you'd actually exercise that right," Diane said, a reluctant smile forming. "He probably assumed you didn't even know what the cars were worth." "He was right about that part," I admitted. "But I've educated myself quickly." Diane sipped her coffee, considering the legal ramifications. "The restraining order is still in effect for all other assets. You can't touch the house, other vehicles, investment accounts, anything else in joint names." "I understand. But these 2 cars alone are worth over $2 million. It's a start." "A start for what, exactly?" Diane asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Securing Paige's education," I said. "And then, if everything else goes according to plan, buying James's share of the firm before he can sell it to Trevor." Diane set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Vanessa, I admire your initiative, but that's an extremely aggressive strategy with significant risk. Even if you can raise the capital, there's no guarantee Trevor or the firm's board would approve you as a partner. That's why I'm meeting Trevor for lunch today, to gauge his receptiveness." "And if he's not receptive? If he reports back to James?" I hadn't shared everything with Diane yet. Not the password I'd found, not the embezzlement Rebecca had uncovered. Some cards were better held close until the right moment. "Then I'll pivot to Plan B," I said simply. Diane studied me for a long moment. You know, when clients first come to me after discovering their spouse's betrayal, they're usually in shock, barely functioning. "You're different, more focused than I've ever seen a client at this stage." "I spent 2 days in shock," I replied. "I can't afford more than that. James has had months to plan his exit. I have less than a week before he returns." As we finished our coffee, Diane provided final advice on the legal boundaries of my plan. I could sell the jointly owned cars, but I needed to document everything meticulously and be prepared to account for the proceeds in divorce proceedings. "And Vanessa," she added as we parted, "be careful. Men like James don't respond well to having their plans disrupted." My lunch with Trevor Warner was set for noon at an upscale restaurant near the firm's office. I arrived early, choosing a quiet corner table that offered privacy for our conversation. Trevor appeared precisely at noon, his lanky frame folded awkwardly into the chair across from me. "Vanessa," he greeted me with genuine warmth. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I said truthfully. "Having a plan helps." "A plan?" he echoed. To move forward. That's actually why I asked you to lunch. I need your perspective on something important. The waiter interrupted to take our orders, and I waited until he'd departed before continuing. Trevor, how much do you know about the firm's finances? I asked, watching his expression carefully. A flicker of unease crossed his face. That's an odd question. Why do you ask? Because my forensic accountant has uncovered some concerning transactions involving Mitchell plus Warner funds. Trevor's face was drained of color. What kind of transactions? I outlined what Rebecca had discovered. The shell company, the diverted client payments, the approximately $450,000 that had disappeared from the firm's accounts. That's impossible, Trevor insisted, though his expression suggested otherwise. We have checks and balances, oversight procedures, all created by and overseen by James, the managing partner for financial operations, I pointed out gently. The firm's division of labor was always clear. You handled design and client relations, he handled the money. Trevor sat back, visibly shaken. I knew something was off. The quarterly profit distributions have been lower than projected for the past 2 cycles, despite our increased client load. He looked at me sharply. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know before you purchase James's share of the firm, I replied. And because I'd like to make you a different offer. What kind of offer? Let me buy James's share instead. Trevor blinked, clearly blindsided. You want to buy into the firm? But you're a curator, not an architect. I have an MBA from Boston, university that I've never fully utilized, I reminded him. Before Paige was born, I managed the business side of 3 different design firms. I understand architectural business operations. But why would you want to? Especially now, after what James has done. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. Precisely because of what he's done. He's spent months extracting money from every source available to him, our personal accounts, his retirement fund, and apparently the firm as well. He's planning to sell his share and disappear with a young woman, leaving behind the wreckage of everything we built together. And you want to… What? Stop him from selling? I want to be the one who buys his share, not you. I want to take control of what he planned to discard. Trevor frowned. Even if I agreed, where would you get that kind of capital? You just said he drained your accounts. I have resources, I said vaguely. What I need to know is whether you'd be open to me as a partner instead of buying James out yourself. Trevor considered this, absently twisting his wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. The business side has always been my weakness, he admitted. I'm an architect, not an accountant. If what you're saying about these diverted funds is true, maybe it would be beneficial to have a partner with financial acumen. Our food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. When the waiter departed, Trevor continued. But Vanessa, you have to understand. This isn't just about business. James and I built this firm from nothing. 20 years of friendship, 15 years as partners. Even with everything you've told me, it's hard to imagine he would deliberately steal from us. I pulled out my phone and pulled up the photos I'd taken of the most damning financial records. These aren't interpretations, Trevor. These are documented. Transfers from the firm's accounts to a shell company James controls. He studied the images, his expression hardening as the evidence became undeniable. If this is accurate, it's not just a betrayal of your marriage. It's a betrayal of our partnership, our friendship, everything we built. Yes, I said simply. Trevor set my phone down, his decision visible in the set of his jaw. What exactly are you proposing? A conditional agreement. If I can secure the capital within 5 days, you'll accept my offer to purchase James's share instead of buying it yourself. And if he objects? It would require his approval. I smiled thinly. Let me worry about that part. Trevor studied me for a long moment. You know, in 15 years of partnership, I've never seen James truly intimidated by anyone. But right now, I think he should be very afraid of you. We spent the remainder of lunch discussing terms, with Trevor ultimately agreeing to my proposal, conditional upon my ability to secure financing and the approval of the firm's board, which consisted of Trevor, James, and their original investor, Robert Chen. As I left the restaurant, I checked my watch, just enough time to reach Bradley Hayes' office for the Porsche sale appointment. The initial piece of my plan had fallen into place. Trevor was receptive. Now I needed capital, and quickly. Bradley's office occupied the top floor of a discreet building in Boston's luxury retail district, its furnishings suggesting old money and exclusive access. He greeted me warmly, then introduced the man who rose from a leather armchair as I entered. Vanessa, meet Alexander Petrov, CEO of New England Automotive Holdings and a serious Porsche enthusiast. The silver-haired man smiled, extending his hand. Mrs. Mitchell, Bradley tells me you're considering parting with your husband's Carrera RS, a magnificent automobile. Our Carrera, I corrected politely. The title is in both our names. Of course. Alexander nodded, his smile never wavering. May I ask why you're selling such a prized vehicle? I'd prepared for this question. Investment diversification. The vintage automobile market is at a historic high, according to Bradley. It seems prudent to capitalize on the opportunity. Very sensible, Alexander agreed, though his expression suggested he suspected there was more to the story. I've been pursuing this particular model for some time. Bradley mentioned you might also consider selling the 356C Cabriolet? If the offer is appropriate, I confirmed. Bradley guided us to a conference table where he'd prepared documentation for both vehicles, including current market valuations, comparable recent sales, and the clean titles showing joint ownership. Mrs. Mitchell has clear legal authority to transfer these vehicles, Bradley assured Alexander, who was examining the titles carefully. And Mr. Mitchell is aware of this transaction? Alexander asked casually. Mr. Mitchell is currently traveling. Internationally, I replied smoothly. The decision to liquidate these assets was made jointly before his departure. It was a lie, but a necessary one. If Alexander believed this was a divorce-related asset grab, he might walk away rather than risk future complications. I see, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely believe me. Well, the vehicles speak for themselves. I'm prepared to offer $1.75 million for the Carrera RS and $285,000 for the 356C Cabriolet, contingent upon physical inspection. The Carrera is worth closer to $185 million in today's market, I countered, remembering Bradley's valuation. Alexander smiled, appreciating the negotiation. Let's split the difference. $1.8 million for the Carrera, $290,000 for the 356C. Total of $2.09 million. I extended my hand. When can you complete the inspection? My team is standing by at your storage facility. With your permission, they can examine the vehicles this afternoon. If everything checks out, we can complete the transaction tomorrow morning. My heart skipped a beat. I'd expected the process to take several days, not less than 24 hours. That would be acceptable, I said, maintaining my composure. As we finalized the preliminary paperwork, my phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Just got a call from James's attorney. He's flying back early. Arrives tomorrow night. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. James was cutting his business trip short, which meant he might have gotten wind that something was happening. My timeline had just collapsed from 5 days to less than 2. Bradley noticed my expression. Everything. All right, Vanessa. Fine, I said, signing the last document with a steady hand. Just a scheduling conflict I need to resolve. As I left Bradley's office with a copy of the sale agreement, I made a quick call to Robert Chen, Paige's godfather, and the third member of Mitchell plus Warner's board of directors. Vanessa, he answered warmly. I've been meaning to call you. How's Paige enjoying NYU? She's thriving, I said, not yet ready to share our family crisis. Robert, I need to meet with you as soon as possible. Today, if you're available. Is everything all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice. No, I said honestly, but I'm working on a solution, and I need your help. He didn't hesitate. I'm at the bank until 6. Come by whenever you can. As I ended the call, I felt the weight of what I was attempting. In less than 48 hours, I needed to sell 2 classic cars, secure over $2 million in funds, convince Robert Chen to support my purchase of James's share of the firm, and be prepared for James's early return. It was an impossible timeline, but then I didn't have the luxury of possible anymore. Boston Trust Bank occupied a stately limestone building in the financial district, its marble-floored lobby speaking of old money and institutional permanence. Robert Chen's office on the executive floor offered sweeping views of Boston Harbor, the late afternoon sun glinting off the water. At 62, Robert remained imposing, tall, straight-backed, with a full head of silver-black hair and the contained energy of someone half his age. He'd been our family friend for nearly 2 decades, ever since James had approached him for the initial funding for Mitchell plus Warner. When Paige was born, we'd asked him to be her godfather, a role he'd embraced wholeheartedly. Vanessa, he greeted me with a concerned embrace. You look exhausted. It's been a challenging few days, I acknowledged, taking the seat he offered. What's going on? Is James all right? I took a deep breath. James is fine. Our marriage, however, is over. Robert's expression shifted from concern to shock. What? Since when? Since I discovered he's been having an affair with a 26-year-old woman, drained our joint accounts of nearly $900,000, raided our retirement funds, and diverted approximately $450,000 from the firm into a shell company. Robert sank into his chair, visibly stunned. I don't even know what to say. It gets worse, I continued. He's already engaged to this woman, bought her a waterfront condo, and was planning to sell his share of the firm to Trevor before disappearing to start a new life. This doesn't sound like the James I know, Robert said, though doubt clouded his eyes. I pulled out my phone and showed him the same financial records I'd shown Trevor, the bank withdrawals, the transfers to JM Consulting, the credit card statements, showing luxury purchases. Robert examined each one, his banker's eye quickly grasping the implications. This is methodical, he said finally. Planned over months, not a momentary lapse. Exactly. And now he's returning from Dubai tomorrow night, not next week as originally planned. I believe he's accelerating his timeline. Robert leaned back, struggling to reconcile this information with the man he'd mentored and supported for years. What do you need from me, Vanessa? 2 things. First, your help securing a business loan. Second, your vote as a board member to approve me as James's replacement at Mitchell plus Warner. His eyebrows shot up. You want to buy James's share of the firm? Yes. I have approximately $2.1 million becoming available tomorrow from the sale of 2 vintage cars. I'll need another $2.7 million in financing to meet the most recent valuation of James's 50% stake. Robert's expression shifted from shock to calculation, the banker emerging through the family friend. The firm is collateral? Along with the house, which appraises at $2.3 million and my grandmother's jewelry collection, conservatively valued at $400,000. That's ambitious, he said, neither approving nor disapproving. May I ask why? Why not just divorce him, take your half of the assets and start fresh? Why take on his business? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself repeatedly over the past 48 hours. Several reasons, I replied carefully. First, practical. The firm is worth more than the other remaining assets combined. If I don't control it, James could still walk away with millions despite what he's stolen. Second, it provides long-term financial security for Paige and myself beyond what a one-time divorce settlement would offer. Robert nodded, following my logic. And the less practical reasons? I met his gaze directly. Because James thinks he can discard 21 years of marriage and walk away to a new life funded by our shared savings. Because he believes I'll accept whatever settlement scraps he deigns to offer. Because he doesn't think I'm capable of understanding his business world, let alone stepping into it. A slow smile spread across Robert's face. He always underestimated you. Most people do, I said simply. Robert stood and walked to the window, considering the harbor view as he thought. The loan itself isn't the problem. Your collateral is sufficient, and your personal credit history is excellent. The real issue is the board vote. You and Trevor would constitute a majority, I pointed out. Yes, but under the firm's bylaws, partners have the right of first refusal for any ownership transfer. James could legally block the sale to anyone, including you. Unless he's removed as a partner first, I countered. The bylaws also state that a partner can be expelled for cause, including financial malfeasance, by unanimous vote of the remaining board members. Robert turned back to me, surprise evident on his face. You've done your homework. I obtained a copy of the partnership agreement from Trevor this afternoon. Section 8, Paragraph 3 specifically addresses partner expulsion for embezzlement or other financial crimes. Robert returned to his desk and pressed the intercom. Melissa, please pull the Mitchell plus Warner file from the secured archives and clear my calendar for the next 2 hours. Turning back to me, he asked, Does Trevor support this plan? Conditionally. He's understandably shocked by the embezzlement, but he recognizes that his design skills and my business acumen could be complementary. And what about the actual running of the firm? Architecture is a specialized field. I don't pretend to be an architect, I acknowledged. My role would be business operations, client relations, and financial oversight, areas where I have relevant experience and education. Trevor would remain the creative director. Robert's assistant delivered a thick folder containing the original loan documents and partnership agreement for Mitchell plus Warner. For the next hour, we reviewed the legal framework of the firm, identifying the specific provisions that could allow my plan to proceed. It's possible, Robert said finally. Complicated, but possible. If, and this is a significant if, we can document the embezzlement conclusively, the board could vote to expel James before he returns. That would trigger the forced buyout clause at the most recent valuation, which would allow me to purchase his share without his approval, I finished. Exactly. But Vanessa, this is an aggressive strategy with significant risk. If we move to expel him and fail, if the evidence isn't conclusive enough, you'll have shown your hand with nothing to show for it. I understand the risk, but staying passive while he liquidates our future isn't an option I can accept. Robert studied me thoughtfully. You know, when James first brought you to dinner at my home all those years ago, I told him afterward that he'd married up. He laughed it off, but I meant it. There was always a substance to you that went deeper than his charm. I felt an unexpected flush of emotion at this vote of confidence from someone who had known us both for so long. Will you help me? I asked. Directly. With the loan, yes, contingent upon proper documentation and board approval for the purchase. As for my board vote, he paused, weighing his words. I need to see conclusive evidence of the embezzlement. Not just withdrawal records, but proof that James personally directed those funds and benefited from them. The forensic accountant is preparing that documentation now. I should have it by tomorrow morning. Then let's reconvene tomorrow at noon, with Trevor if possible. If the evidence is as clear as you suggest, we can proceed with the emergency board meeting and partner expulsion vote before James returns. As I stood to leave, Robert added, And Vanessa? Have you considered what James might do when he realizes what's happening? A man who would methodically drain family accounts and embezzle from his own firm may not react well to being outmaneuvered. I've considered it, I said, thinking of the financial restraining order, the documented evidence of fraud, the groundwork Diane had laid for potential criminal charges. James has always been confident to the point of arrogance. He won't expect this, not from me. After leaving Robert's office, I had one more critical ally to secure, someone who could provide technical expertise I desperately needed. Emma Cooper had been my research assistant at the museum for 3 years before leaving to start her own cybersecurity consulting firm. At 32, she was a certified ethical hacker with a particular interest in financial systems, and she owed me a favor after I'd helped her secure the funding for her business. Her office was a converted warehouse space in Cambridge, the industrial aesthetic softened by lush plants and colorful abstract art. She greeted me with a tight hug, her purple-streaked hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Vanessa, this is an unexpected surprise. Museum emergency?" "Personal emergency," I corrected, settling into the ergonomic chair she offered. "And I need absolute discretion." Emma's expression turned serious. "Of course. What's going on?" I explained the situation in broad strokes: James's betrayal, the missing money, my plan to take control of the firm before he could liquidate it. "That's... wow," Emma said when I finished. "I'm so sorry. What do you need from me?" "Technical assistance. I found what I believe is a password James is using for accounts I haven't been able to access." I showed her the string of characters I'd photographed from James's desk drawer. "KS26, PR12, she read. "Looks like a fairly strong password. What accounts are we talking about?" "That's part of what I need to find out. I know he's been moving money somewhere, likely offshore accounts or cryptocurrency. I need to trace it." Emma frowned. "Vanessa, what you're asking edges into legally questionable territory. Accessing accounts with a password you found rather than one shared with you openly." "I understand the concerns," I said carefully. "I'm not asking you to hack anything. But if this password opens access to information about our marital assets he's deliberately hidden from divorce proceedings, I have a right to know." Emma considered this, chewing thoughtfully on her lower lip. "Here's what I can do legally. I can help you search for accounts associated with James's known email addresses where this password might work. I can show you how to check login credentials without actually accessing the accounts. And I can help you document anything you find for your attorney." "That would be incredibly helpful," I said sincerely. "But," Emma continued, "I can't directly access accounts for you, even with a password you provide. That crosses a line I'm not comfortable with professionally." "Understood. I just need to know what exists and where to direct the forensic accountant." For the next hour, Emma guided me through a methodical process of identifying potential accounts James might have established. Using his email addresses and common username patterns, we discovered 3 previously unknown accounts: a Cayman Islands banking portal, a cryptocurrency exchange, and a Swiss investment platform. "The password attempt validation suggests your password would work on the Cayman account," Emma noted, showing me the subtle difference in error messages when incorrect versus correct credentials were entered. "But again, I strongly recommend you let your attorney handle the actual access through proper legal channels." "I will," I assured her, though we both knew I was gathering intelligence I might use differently. By the time I left Emma's office, I had a much clearer picture of James's digital financial landscape, and, potentially, the destinations of our missing money. As I drove home through the darkening city, I felt a strange calm descend. In just 24 hours, I had assembled a team of allies, each providing crucial pieces of the puzzle. Diane with legal strategy, Trevor with insider firm knowledge, Robert with financial backing and board support, Emma with technical expertise. Tomorrow would bring the car sale completion, the forensic accountant's final report, and most critically, the emergency board meeting that could expel James from his own firm before he even landed back in Boston. And tomorrow night, James would return, expecting to find a compliant, devastated wife awaiting his practiced explanations and carefully crafted settlement offer. Instead, he would find something else entirely. Dawn found me already awake, reviewing the documents Emma had helped me compile. I hadn't told Paige the full extent of my plans. She knew only that I was working with attorneys to secure our financial future. The less she knew about the specifics, the less she would have to process during an already traumatic time. She appeared in the kitchen doorway around 7, still in pajamas, her dark hair tousled from sleep. "Mom, you're up early." "Big day ahead," I said, quickly organizing the papers into a folder. "How did you sleep?" "Not great." She poured herself coffee from the pot I'd brewed hours earlier. "Dad texted. He's coming home tonight instead of next week." My stomach tightened. "What did he say exactly?" Paige pulled out her phone and read, "Home tomorrow night. We need to talk about what your mother has told you. There are 2 sides to every story." Anger flashed across her face. "2 sides? Like there's some explanation that makes stealing. My college fund, okay?" "He's trying to control the narrative," I said, keeping my voice calm despite my own simmering rage. "It's what he does. Shapes perceptions, manages expectations." "Are you going to be here when he arrives?" Paige asked, concerned about etching her features. "No," I admitted. "I have meetings that will likely run late, but I've arranged for you to have dinner with Aunt Kelly." My sister would provide both emotional support and physical distance from the confrontation that was inevitably coming. Paige nodded, visibly relieved. "What are you going to do about him? About everything?" I hesitated, weighing how much to share. "I'm securing our financial future. The details are complicated, but by tonight, we'll be in a much stronger position." My phone buzzed with a text from Alexander Petrov's assistant. "Inspection complete. Both vehicles were approved. Mr. Petrov confirmed a 9 a.m. meeting at Boston. Trust bank for funds transfer. One piece falling into place. Now for the rest." After Paige left to meet friends for breakfast, a welcome distraction I'd encouraged, I drove to Diane's office for the 8 a.m. meeting with Rebecca Yuan, the forensic accountant. Diane and Rebecca were already reviewing documents. When I arrived, both women looking grimly satisfied. "We've got him," Diane said without preamble. "Rebecca's final report is definitive. James didn't just steal from your joint accounts. He systematically embezzled from the firm through multiple mechanisms, all documented." Rebecca slid a bound report across the table. "As suspected, Mr. Mitchell established JM Consulting LLC 8 months ago, registered in Delaware for privacy. Since then, he's directed approximately $475,000 in client payments to this entity instead of to Mitchell plus Warner. Additionally, he's been inflating reimbursement requests for business travel and submitting false vendor invoices." "Total amount?" I asked, scanning the meticulously organized documentation. $683,240 over 8 months, Rebecca replied. "And that's just what we've been able to document conclusively. There are another $145,000 in suspicious transactions that would require additional investigation." Diane smiled tightly. "This is more than enough for the board meeting. It's also enough for criminal charges, should you choose to pursue that route." The thought of James facing criminal prosecution sent a conflicting wave of emotions through me. Vindication mixed with sadness for what this would mean for Paige. "One step at a time," I said. "First, the car sale and board meeting. We can discuss criminal charges afterward." Diane nodded approvingly. "Smart. Keep your options open until you've secured the firm." At 8:45, I left for Boston Trust Bank, where Robert had arranged a private conference room for the car sale transaction. Alexander Petrov was already waiting, accompanied by his attorney and a bank representative. "Mrs. Mitchell," he greeted me, his manner professional but warm. "Everything is in order. My team was quite impressed with the condition of both vehicles." James was meticulous about their maintenance, I acknowledged. A bittersweet recognition of the care he'd shown his cars while systematically dismantling our life together. The transaction proceeded with the efficient precision of the ultra-wealthy. Documents were signed, transfers initiated. By 9:30, it was complete. $2.09 million had been deposited into a new account Robert had created for me, separate from any account James could access. "Pleasure doing business with you," Alexander said as we concluded. "I'll arrange for the vehicles to be transported this afternoon." I handed him the keys, feeling a momentary pang at releasing these last tangible connections to my marriage. But sentiment was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when so much remained at stake. Robert arrived as Alexander departed, his expression one of cautious optimism. "The transfer was successful?" "Yes, the funds are secured." "Good. Trevor is waiting in my office. If you're ready, we can proceed with reviewing the forensic report before the formal board meeting at noon." Trevor's face was grim as we joined. Him. The weight of what he was about to learn evident in his tense posture. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to be clear about something. If the evidence is as conclusive as you've suggested, I'll support the expulsion. But I need absolute certainty. James and I have been friends since college. This isn't a decision I can make lightly." "I understand," I assured him, sliding Rebecca's report across the table. "Take all the time you need." For the next hour, Trevor and Robert meticulously reviewed the evidence Rebecca had compiled. The documentation was damning. Bank transfers. With James's electronic signature, emails directing clients to send payments to JM Consulting, fabricated expense reports with his approval. "Jesus," Trevor muttered repeatedly as he turned the pages. "How long has this been going on?" 8 months that we can prove, I replied. "Possibly longer." Trevor looked up, his expression hardened. "He's been stealing from me, from our employees, our clients, while looking me in the eye every day. While I trusted him to manage our finances. While I defended him when others questioned his decisions." Robert placed a steadying hand on Trevor's shoulder. "That went about as expected," Trevor said grimly after James hung up. I exhaled slowly, the confrontation leaving me both drained and oddly energized. "He'll try to fight this." "Of course he will," Trevor agreed. "But legally, his position is weak. The evidence is overwhelming." My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Security reports movement at your house. James arrived 10 minutes ago. Appears agitated. Police on standby." I showed Trevor the message. "I should go. He'll likely try to remove valuables or documents before any formal property division." "You can't go back there tonight," Trevor objected. "Not with him in this state." "I don't intend to confront him," I assured him. "But I need to document whatever he takes. It's evidence for the divorce proceedings." After arranging to meet with Trevor and Robert the following morning to finalize the buyout paperwork, I left the firm, but instead of driving home, I headed to a hotel several blocks away. Diane had suggested I secure a room as a precaution, somewhere James wouldn't think to look for me. From the hotel, I monitored the security camera feeds on my laptop, watching as James stormed through our house, his movements erratic and agitated. He spent nearly an hour in his office, removing files and electronics, occasionally stopping to make angry phone calls. Around 8 p.m., 2 police officers appeared at our door, responding to a call from the security company when James attempted to access the safe where my grandmother's jewelry was stored. The officers informed him that a financial restraining order was in effect, preventing him from removing valuables from the home. His response wasn't audible through the security feed, but his body language spoke volumes, gesturing angrily, then deflating as the reality of his situation began to sink in. After the police left, James sat in the kitchen with his head in his hands for nearly 20 minutes before pulling out his phone and making another call. From the timestamp, it coincided with a text I received moments later. "We need to talk. This isn't what you think." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be better communicated through attorneys at this point. Around 10 p.m., James left the house with a single suitcase, his movements more controlled but his face set in cold fury. As his car pulled away, I felt a complex wave of emotions wash over me. Relief that he was gone, sadness for what we'd lost, and steely resolve to protect what remained. I called Diane to update her, then contacted the security company to confirm. They would maintain surveillance through the night in case James returned. "You've handled this remarkably well," Diane observed. "Most clients in your situation would be emotional wrecks by now." "I don't have the luxury of falling apart," I replied simply. "Not until Paige's future is secure." After ending the call, I lay on the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, the events of the past few days playing on endless loop in my mind. The discovery of James's betrayal, the formation of my counter-strategy, the methodical assembly of allies and resources, the execution of a plan that had transformed me from victim to victor in less than a week. Yet victory felt hollow in the quiet of the hotel room. I had secured the firm, prevented James from walking away with millions, and protected Paige's education fund. But I couldn't repair the broken trust, couldn't undo the knowledge that the man I'd built a life with had been meticulously planning to abandon that life for months. My phone chimed with a message from Paige. "At Aunt Kelly's. Dad's been calling nonstop. I'm not answering. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I texted back. "Staying at a hotel tonight as a precaution. Everything's proceeding as planned." "Hotel? What aren't you telling me, Mom?" I hesitated, then called her instead of texting. She answered immediately. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Why aren't you at home?" "Your father's not taking the situation well," I explained carefully. "It's better to give him space right now." "What situation exactly? You've been super vague about your plan." I took a deep breath, deciding Paige deserved more transparency now that events were in motion. "I've bought your father's share of Mitchell plus Warner. As of today, I'm Trevor's new business partner." Silence. Then, "Wait, what? How? When?" I gave her the abbreviated version: the car sales, the loan from Robert, the discovery of James's embezzlement, the board vote for expulsion. "Holy shit," Paige breathed when I finished. "You're telling me you took Dad's company?" "I didn't take it," I corrected gently. "I purchased his share at fair market value after he was legally expelled for stealing from the firm. The money will be placed in escrow pending his acceptance of the buyout terms." Another silence. I don't even know what to say. It's badass, but also kind of terrifying. Despite everything, I smiled at her description. It was necessary. He left us with few options. "Is that why he sounds so desperate in his messages? Because you outmaneuvered him?" "Partly," I acknowledged. "He didn't expect me to fight back, let alone succeed." "Good," Paige said fiercely. "He deserved it." Her voice softened. "But Mom? Be careful. I've never heard Dad like this before." After reassuring Paige that all necessary precautions were in place, I ended the call and tried to get some sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, finalizing the buyout paperwork, meeting with key firm clients to reassure them about the transition, and inevitably, dealing with whatever counterattack James might launch. Morning arrived with a flurry of messages. Diane confirming that James had spent the night at a downtown hotel, Trevor reporting that all firm security protocols had been updated to remove James's access, and Robert checking that I was ready for our 9 a.m. meeting to complete the buyout documentation. I dressed carefully in a navy suit I'd packed in my emergency bag, a subtle armor for the day ahead. Power dressing wasn't my usual style as a museum curator, but today I needed to project authority and confidence. The meeting at Robert's office was brief, but consequential. The paperwork officially transferring James's 50% stake in Mitchell plus Warner to me upon his acceptance of the buyout terms, or court order if he refused, was executed, with Robert's loan documentation completed simultaneously. "Congratulations," Trevor said as we signed the final documents. "You're now the presumptive co-owner of one of Boston's top architectural firms." "Presumptive until James accepts the buyout," I reminded him. Or is forced to by court order, Robert added. Given the evidence, that's the likely outcome if he refuses the initial offer. As we concluded the meeting, Sarah Levinson, the firm's attorney, provided an update on the buyout notification. The formal offer has been delivered to Mr. Mitchell's attorney. The 72-hour response window is now in effect. If he fails to respond or refuses the offer, we'll immediately petition the court for enforcement under the partnership agreement's dispute resolution clause. I nodded, mentally calculating the timeline. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Sarah explained, the firm operates under the interim leadership structure, with you and Mr. Warner serving as acting partners pending final resolution. Mr. Mitchell is barred from firm premises, client contact, or access to any firm resources. Trevor walked me to my car afterward, his expression thoughtful. You know, when you first proposed this, I thought it was an emotional reaction to James's betrayal. But seeing how you've handled everything these past few days, the strategic thinking, the coalition building, the precise execution, I'm starting to realize the firm might be getting an upgrade in the partner department. I smiled, appreciating his vote of confidence. Let's see if I can help grow the business before you make that assessment. Fair enough. Where are you headed now? To meet Diane at the house, I replied. We need to inventory what James removed last night and file the appropriate documentation for the divorce proceedings. Trevor's expression grew serious. Be careful. James has never responded well to losing. I know, I said simply. That's why I'm not going alone. Diane was waiting in her car when I arrived at the house, accompanied by a private security consultant she often used for high-conflict divorce cases. James hasn't returned since last night, she reported as we walked to the front door. But he's been calling my office repeatedly, demanding to speak with me. What does he want? I asked, unlocking the door, to negotiate, supposedly. He claims there's been a misunderstanding about the firm finances and that you've been manipulated by Trevor into this hostile takeover. I laughed without humor. Typical James. It can't possibly be that I outmaneuvered him on my own. Inside, the house showed signs of James's angry departure. A broken picture frame in the hallway, papers scattered in his office, cabinet doors left open in his haste to collect personal items. We need to document everything, Diane instructed, pulling out her tablet. Anything missing, anything damaged, it all factors into the divorce settlement. For the next 2 hours, we methodically moved through the house, photographing and cataloging. James had taken primarily personal items, clothes, some electronics, his awards and certificates. The safe where I'd stored my grandmother's jewelry remained secure, though there were scratch marks around the keypad suggesting he'd attempted to override the code. In his office, the computer was gone, as were many of his files. The display cabinet with the miniature car collection was intact, though one model, the Carrera RS, was missing. A small act of petty revenge, taking the replica of the car I'd sold. Most of this is inconsequential for the divorce, Diane observed as we finished. Personal effects he's entitled to take. The financial documentation will be far more important. Speaking of which, I said, closing the last inventory file on her tablet. When do we formally file for divorce? We can file today if you're ready, Diane replied. The financial restraining order and documented evidence of financial misconduct give a strong positioning from the start. I considered this, weighing the pros and cons of immediate action versus strategic patience. Let's wait until the firm buyout is finalized. I want that resolved before adding another legal front. By mid-afternoon, we had completed the house inventory and secured new locks on all exterior doors. The security consultant installed additional cameras covering potential blind spots and programmed them to send alerts directly to my phone if motion was detected after hours. This should give you comprehensive coverage, he explained, showing me the monitoring app on my phone. Any unusual activity, you'll know about it instantly. As we wrapped up the security upgrades, my phone rang with a call from Trevor. "We have a situation," he said without preamble. "James just showed up at the Kendall Square project meeting with Axion Biotech." My stomach dropped. Axion was the firm's largest client, a pharmaceutical company building a new research campus that represented nearly 30% of Mitchell plus Warner's current billings. "What happened?" I asked, already gathering my things to leave. He told them the firm is in transition and that they should delay any further payments until the internal dispute is resolved. Implied that I might be mismanaging funds. "That's defamation," Diane interjected, having overheard the conversation. "It's also potentially tortious interference with business relationships," Trevor added. "But the immediate problem is that the Axion executives are now concerned about the stability of the firm. They've called an emergency meeting at 4 p.m. to discuss the project status." I checked my watch. 2:30 p.m. "I'll meet you at the office in 30 minutes. We need to prepare a unified response before that meeting." After ending the call, I turned to Diane. "He's attacking the firm's client relationships. Not surprising," she replied grimly. "If he can't control the firm, he'll try to damage it, reduce its value before the buyout is finalized. Can we stop him legally? We can file for an emergency injunction prohibiting him from contacting firm clients or making defamatory statements. But that will take time to process." I nodded, already formulating a strategy. In the meantime, we need to secure the key client relationships immediately. At Mitchell plus Warner's offices, Trevor had assembled the senior design team in the conference room, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly anxious. "James contacted Axion's CEO directly," Trevor explained as I joined them. "Reportedly told him that the firm is undergoing a hostile restructuring and suggested that project quality might suffer as a result." "Classic destabilization tactic," I observed, slipping into the mindset I'd developed during my museum's difficult transition to a new director years earlier. "He's hoping to create enough uncertainty that Axion will either pull the project or use it as leverage to negotiate reduced fees, which would significantly impact the firm's valuation," Trevor concluded, "potentially reducing the buyout amount." "What's our approach for the 4 p.m. meeting?" asked Melissa Chen, the project lead for Axion. "Transparency with appropriate boundaries," I replied, drawing on crisis management principles I'd learned during museum controversies. "We acknowledge the partnership change without dwelling on details, emphasize continuity and project leadership, and focus on deliverables and timeline adherence." For the next hour, we prepared talking points, gathered progress documentation, and assembled a presentation highlighting the firm's stable transition plan. The design team, initially skeptical of my involvement, gradually warmed to my strategic approach as they saw how it protected both the project and their positions. "There's one more thing we should address," I added as we finalized preparations. "James may attempt to contact other key clients. We need to reach them first." Trevor nodded. "I've compiled a list of our top 10 clients by revenue. We can divide them among the senior team for immediate outreach." As the team dispersed to make these preemptive calls, Trevor pulled me aside. "You're surprisingly good at this," he observed. "Crisis management. Museums aren't as sedate as they appear," I replied with a small smile. "Budget cuts, controversial exhibitions, donor demands. I've navigated my share of institutional politics." "Well, it shows." The team was ready to panic when James contacted Axion, but you've given them a clear path forward. He paused. "Thank you for stepping in like this." "I have as much at stake as anyone," I reminded him. "More, in some ways." At precisely 4 p.m., we convened in the main conference room for the virtual meeting with Axion's leadership team. Dr. Richard Evans, Axion's CEO, appeared on screen alongside their CFO and head of facilities. "Mr. Warner, Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Evans began, his tone formal. Thank you for making time on short notice. As you can imagine, we were surprised to receive a call from James Mitchell this morning with some concerning information about your firm's stability. We appreciate your willingness to discuss this directly, I replied before Trevor could speak, intuiting that a new voice might carry more credibility in this moment. As you may have learned, Mitchell plus Warner has indeed undergone a recent leadership change. James Mitchell is no longer affiliated with the firm. So abruptly? The CFO interjected skeptically. After 15 years? The decision was made by the firm's board based on documented financial improprieties, I stated calmly. While I understand your concern, I can assure you that this change will not impact your project in any way. The design team led by Melissa remains intact, and Trevor continues to provide creative oversight. And you are? Dr. Evans asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Vanessa Mitchell, the firm's new managing partner. My background includes an MBA from Boston University and 15 years in arts administration, most recently as chief curator at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, where I oversee a $14 million annual acquisition and exhibition budget. I could see the subtle shift in their expressions, from skepticism to reassessment. I continued before they could interrupt. I understand that unexpected transitions create uncertainty. That's why we've prepared a comprehensive update on your project status, including all milestones met to date and the detailed timeline for the next phase of development. Melissa took over, walking them through the technical aspects of the project with confident precision while I monitored the Axion executives' reactions. By the time she finished, their body language had relaxed considerably. This is certainly more detailed than we expected, Dr. Evans acknowledged. But I have to ask, Mr. Mitchell suggested that the firm's financial stability might be compromised. Can you address that concern? I'd be happy to, I replied, pulling up the financial summary we'd prepared. Mitchell plus Warner currently maintains a debt-to-equity ratio of 0.4, well below industry average. Our project completion rate is 98%, with client retention at 87% over 5 years. The recent leadership change has been accompanied by new capital, investment and strategic expansion plans in cultural and institutional sectors. The CFO leaned forward, his interest piqued. New capital investment? Yes. The buyout of James Mitchell's share represents a significant reinvestment in the firm's future. Additionally, we're exploring opportunities to expand our portfolio in museum and cultural institution design, an area where my background provides strategic advantage. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Trevor addressing specific design questions while I managed the broader strategic concerns. By the conclusion, Dr. Evans's demeanor had transformed from wary to cautiously optimistic. Thank you for your transparency, he said as we wrapped up. While this transition was unexpected, your preparation and clear vision are reassuring. We look forward to continuing our partnership. After the Axion team disconnected, the conference room erupted in relieved exclamations and congratulations. That was masterful, Trevor told me quietly as the team celebrated. You completely neutralized James's attempt to destabilize the relationship. 1 down, 9 to go, I replied, already thinking of the other key clients we needed to secure. Over the next 3 hours, we conducted similar outreach to the firm's other major clients, each conversation following the template we'd established. With Axion, acknowledge the transition, emphasize continuity, demonstrate value, and present a clear vision for the future. By 8 p.m., we had contacted all 10 priority clients, with 9 expressing continued confidence in the firm. Only one, a smaller residential developer with personal ties to James, had indicated they might reconsider their project. Overall, a resounding success, Trevor declared as we debriefed in his office afterward. James's attempt to undermine client confidence has largely failed. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Levinson, the firm's attorney. James's lawyer requesting an emergency meeting tomorrow a.m. Says client prepared to negotiate reasonable terms for buyout. I showed the message to Trevor, who raised his eyebrows. That was fast. I expected him to hold out for the full 72 hours. He's realizing his position is weaker than he thought, I observed. The client outreach today probably got back to him. How do you want to proceed? I considered our options carefully. We had successfully neutralized James's initial counterattack against the firm's client relationships. The security measures at the house were in place. The buyout documentation was prepared. We were in a position of strength, but negotiation always involved compromise. Let's meet, I decided. But on our terms, with full legal representation present. Trevor nodded, approvingly. And your bottom line? The partnership expulsion stands, I said firmly. The valuation can be negotiated within reasonable parameters, but there will be no return to the firm under any circumstances. As I drove back to the hotel that evening, exhausted but satisfied with the day's developments, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Vanessa. Katerina Sorokin's accented voice was immediately recognizable from the brief audio clips I'd heard during James's call from Dubai. Ms. Sorokin, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. This is unexpected. I want to meet, she said without preamble. Just you and me. There are things you should know. I can't imagine what we would have to discuss, I replied carefully. Perhaps James has been lying to both of us, she suggested. Or maybe about the other women besides me. Or possibly about the gambling debts you haven't discovered yet. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. What gambling debts? Meet me tomorrow. Cafe Rossetti in the North End. 9 a.m. She paused. Come alone, or I take this information elsewhere. The line went dead before I could respond. I pulled over, my mind racing with implications. Gambling debts? Other women? Was Katerina attempting to manipulate me? Or did she genuinely have information that could affect the divorce and buyout proceedings? Either way, it presented both opportunity and risk, a potential source of leverage, but also a possible trap set by James. As I contemplated this unexpected development, another text arrived from Diane. Police called to your house. James attempted entry, became belligerent when new locks prevented access. No arrest, but an incident report filed. Security system captured everything. Excellent evidence for a restraining order. The counterattack was intensifying on multiple fronts. James was growing desperate, and desperate men were unpredictable. But then again, so was I, as he was quickly learning. Cafe Rossetti was tucked away on a narrow side street in Boston's North End, a neighborhood of winding alleys and centuries-old brick buildings that housed the city's Italian community. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a clear view of both the entrance and the street outside. Against Diane's explicit advice, I had come alone. She had argued vehemently against meeting Katerina at all, viewing it as an obvious trap orchestrated by James. But my instincts told me otherwise. The mention of gambling debts and other women suggested information James would want concealed, not revealed. Still, I had taken precautions. The cafe's location had been shared with both Diane and Trevor. My phone was set to record automatically, and I had filed the temporary restraining order against James that morning, ensuring he legally couldn't approach me even if this was an ambush. At precisely 9 a.m., Katerina Sorokin entered the cafe. She was even more striking in person than in the photos I'd seen, tall and slender, with platinum blonde hair and the kind of bone structure that turned heads. Dressed in a simple black turtleneck and jeans, she could have been a model, though her graduate degree in economics from Moscow State University suggested a substance behind the beautiful facade. She spotted me immediately, making her way through the crowded cafe with graceful confidence. Up close, I noticed the dark circles under her eyes, carefully concealed with makeup but visible nonetheless. Mrs. Mitchell, she greeted me, sliding into the chair across from me. Her accent was less pronounced than during our brief phone conversation. "Ms. Sorokin," I replied evenly. "You wanted to meet." She studied me openly, her blue eyes calculating. "You are not what I expected." "Oh? And what did you expect? Someone broken, devastated." She shrugged elegantly. "Instead, you take his company. Very impressive." A server approached, and Katerina ordered an espresso before continuing. "You should know. I did not know you existed until 2 months ago." I raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You expect me to believe that James never mentioned he was married during your relationship?" "Oh, he mentioned a wife," she clarified. "But according to James, you had separated years ago, maintained the marriage. Only for appearances. He claimed divorce proceedings were already underway, just not publicized." The lie was so audacious it almost made me laugh. "And you believed him?" "At first, yes." She accepted her espresso from the server with a brief smile. "He was always traveling alone, never wore a wedding ring, had his own apartment downtown where we spent most of our time. Why wouldn't I believe him?" "The condo in the seaport," I noted. "Purchased with money from our joint savings account." Katerina nodded. "I discovered that part only recently, along with much else." She reached into her designer handbag and removed a slim folder, placing it on the table between us. "This is why I wanted to meet." I eyed the folder cautiously. "What is it?" "Evidence that James Mitchell is not the man either of us thought we knew." She pushed it toward me. "Bank statements, casino receipts, loan applications. James has a gambling problem. High-stakes poker, primarily. Has for years, apparently." I opened the folder, scanning the contents quickly. Credit card statements showing cash advances at various casinos. Loan applications with private lenders at exorbitant interest rates. Bank transfers to offshore accounts labeled investment opportunities that appeared to be online gambling platforms. "How did you get these?" I asked, still reviewing the documents. "His laptop," Katerina replied matter-of-factly. "He left it, unlocked when he went to shower." I had begun to suspect something was wrong. Money he promised wasn't arriving, explanations that didn't add up. So I looked. Her expression hardened. "I found these documents and emails to other women, and the truth about his marriage to you. Why are you sharing this with me?" I studied her face, looking for deception or manipulation. "Self-interest," she admitted bluntly. "James owes dangerous people significant money. Over $1.2 million to private lenders with connections to people you don't want to know." When I confronted him about finding these documents, about the lies regarding your marriage, he became... She hesitated. "Not physically violent, but frightening, threatening." "And the engagement?" I asked, gesturing to the large diamond on her left hand. Katerina twisted the ring absently. "Part of his fantasy future. A life where he escapes his debts, his failing marriage, his increasingly desperate financial situation. He planned to sell his share of the firm, combine it with your savings, and disappear to somewhere beyond extradition. With you." That was his plan. Her smile was cold. "Not mine. Not anymore." The pieces were coming together. Not just James's betrayal of our marriage, but a much larger deception spanning years. The embezzlement from the firm, the drained accounts, the secret condo, all part of a desperate attempt to cover mounting gambling debts while funding an escape route. "Why come to me now?" I asked. "Why not just walk away?" "Because he's dangerous in his desperation," she replied. "When you took the firm, blocked his access to that money, he became unhinged, talked about fixing the problem by any means necessary." A chill ran through me. "Are you suggesting he might become violent?" "I'm saying a man with over $1 million in gambling debts to dangerous creditors who has just lost his escape plan is unpredictable." She gestured to the folder. Those loan sharks won't care about your divorce proceedings or legal buyout timelines. They want their money, and James promised them the firm's sale would provide it. "Have you gone to the police?" I asked. "With what? Evidence I obtained by accessing his computer without permission? Besides, these are not the kind of creditors who resolve disputes through legal channels." The implications were disturbing. If James had borrowed from organized crime or similar entities, his inability to pay could escalate the situation beyond financial disputes into something far more dangerous. "There's something else," Katerina added, lowering her voice. "James mentioned having a backup plan if the firm sale fell through. Something about insurance policies and offshore accounts you didn't know about." "What kind of insurance policies?" "He didn't specify, but he seemed confident it would generate enough cash to satisfy his immediate creditors if necessary." My mind raced through possibilities: life insurance policies I wasn't aware of, other hidden assets, perhaps accounts in tax havens. Whatever it was, it represented yet another layer of deception in a marriage I'd thought was built on mutual trust. "Why are you really telling me this?" I asked again, still suspicious of her motives. Katerina met my gaze directly. "Because I'm leaving Boston today, returning to Moscow. And because despite everything, I don't wish to see either you or your daughter harmed by James's desperation." "Do you love him?" The question surprised even me as it left my mouth. She considered it seriously. "I thought I did. The man he pretended to be, successful, honest, unattached, that man was easy to love. The real James Mitchell?" She shook her head. "That man I fear." We sat in silence for a moment, two women connected by the same deceptive man, processing the implications of all she had revealed. "The negotiation meeting is scheduled for 11 a.m. today," I said finally. "James's attorney requested it, suggesting he's ready to accept reasonable buyout terms." "Be careful," Katerina warned. "If his creditors are pressuring him, he'll say anything, agree to anything temporarily to buy time. But he won't honor it if he can find any way to avoid it." As we prepared to leave, Katerina removed her engagement ring and placed it on the table. "You should have this. He purchased it with your money after all. Consider it a small down payment on what he owes you." The diamond caught the morning light, throwing prisms across the table. A symbol of false promises and elaborate deception. "Keep it," I said. "Sell it. Start fresh somewhere." Katerina smiled. A genuine smile this time, not the practiced one she'd shown earlier. "You are definitely not what I expected, Vanessa Mitchell." "Neither are you," I acknowledged. As she walked away, I gathered the documents she'd provided, already formulating how best to use this new information. The meeting with James's attorney would now proceed on entirely different terms. I arrived at Diane's office at 10:30 a.m., the folder from Katerina tucked securely in my briefcase. Trevor and Robert were already there, along with Sarah Levinson, the firm's corporate counsel. "You did what?" Diane exclaimed when I explained where I'd been. Meeting Katerina alone was incredibly risky. "But productive," I countered, sliding the folder across her desk. "These documents reveal a gambling addiction James has apparently hidden for years. Debts totaling over $1.2 million to private lenders, some with potential criminal connections." Diane examined the contents, her expression growing increasingly grim. "This changes our negotiating position significantly. If these debts exist, they constitute undisclosed liabilities that could impact both the divorce settlement and the firm buyout terms." "More importantly," Sarah added, reviewing the loan documents, "they represent a serious breach of fiduciary duty to the firm. A partner with gambling debts of this magnitude, particularly to questionable lenders, creates material risk for the business." Trevor looked stunned. "I had no idea. All these years, and I never suspected gambling. That's how addiction works," Robert observed quietly. "The adept ones become expert at compartmentalization." At precisely 11 a.m., James's attorney, Lawrence Hoffman, arrived. A silver-haired veteran of Boston's legal community, known for representing high-net-worth clients in contentious divorces, Hoffman exuded the confidence of someone accustomed to negotiating from strength. "Good morning," he greeted us smoothly. "I appreciate everyone's willingness to meet on short notice. My client is eager to resolve this unfortunate situation amicably." "Is your client joining us?" Diane asked, noting the empty chair beside Hoffman. "Mr. Chi. Mitchell thought it best to let me handle the negotiations without the potential emotional complications of his presence," Hoffman replied diplomatically. "How considerate," I remarked dryly. Hoffman smiled thinly before continuing. "After reviewing the partnership agreement and the allegations of financial impropriety, my client is prepared to accept the expulsion from the partnership, contingent upon a fair valuation of his ownership stake." "Define fair," Trevor prompted. "The most recent valuation of $4.8 million without deductions for the alleged embezzlement, which Mr. Mitchell categorically denies." Diane laughed. "That's your opening position? Fascinating." "Perhaps we should clarify our position," I interjected, sliding copies of Katerina's documents across the table. "These materials came into our possession this morning. They document gambling debts exceeding $1.2 million that Mr. Mitchell has accumulated over several years, including during his tenure as managing partner of Mitchell plus Warner." Hoffman's expression remained professionally neutral as he reviewed the documents, but a slight tightening around his eyes betrayed his surprise. "Additionally," I continued, "these debts appear to be owed to private lenders with potential criminal connections, creating not just financial liability, but security risks for the firm and its clients. The provenance of these documents is questionable at best," Hoffman countered, though his voice lacked conviction. "They would hardly be admissible in any legal proceeding." "Perhaps not in their current form," Diane agreed, "but they provide more than sufficient basis for subpoenas to the financial institutions and casinos mentioned, which would generate admissible evidence. Moreover," Sarah added, "these documents establish a pattern that aligns perfectly with the embezzlement already documented through the firm's financial records. They provide context and motive for Mr. Mitchell's actions." Hoffman sat back, reassessing his position. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Given these additional undisclosed liabilities and the potential damage to the firm's reputation," I stated calmly, "we're adjusting our offer. Mr. Mitchell's partnership share will be valued at $4.8 million, less the $683,240 in documented embezzlement, less an additional $500,000 for breach of fiduciary duty and reputational damage to the firm." "That's preposterous," Hoffman objected. "You can't arbitrarily reduce the valuation by $500,000 for nebulous reputational damage." "We can and we are," Robert stated firmly. "The partnership agreement explicitly provides for valuation adjustments based on partner misconduct. Gambling debts of this magnitude, concealed from your business partner, certainly qualify. Furthermore," Diane added, "should Mr. Mitchell reject this offer, we're prepared to file a petition for emergency injunctive relief, freezing all remaining proceeds pending criminal investigation of both the embezzlement and potentially structuring violations related to these casino transactions." The room fell silent as Hoffman absorbed the comprehensive dismantling of his negotiating position. Finally, he sighed. "I'll need to consult with my client." "Of course," I replied. "He has until 5 p.m. today to accept these terms. After that, we proceed with the criminal referrals." As Hoffman gathered his materials to leave, I added one final point. "Oh, and please inform your client that we're aware of his comments to Axion Biotech and other firm clients. Any further attempts to interfere with client relationships will be met with immediate legal action for tortious interference." After Hoffman departed, Trevor turned to me with undisguised admiration. That was decisive. It was necessary, I replied. James responds only to strength. Anything less, he perceives as weakness to exploit. Do you think he'll accept? Robert asked. He doesn't have a choice, Diane answered before I could. His position is untenable, and Hoffman knows it. He'll advise acceptance of the revised terms. And if he doesn't? Trevor pressed. I met his gaze steadily. Then we follow through on every consequence we outlined. No bluffing, no second chances. The confrontation had been executed perfectly. James outmaneuvered yet again, this time without even being present to witness it. But as we wrapped up the meeting, I couldn't shake Katerina's warning about his backup plan and the desperation of a man with dangerous creditors demanding payment. The battle was nearly won, but something told me James Mitchell had one more move to make before this was truly over. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.